highest I dare look when the tyres get really hot. So pressure-wise, 26.0 to 27.4 at your absolute limit in terms of the pressure there. Now your toe. So what the toe does in essence is it's the angle at which the tyres face in or out is the best way that I can explain it. So let me go. I'll go into my F7 camera and show you. Yes, green light. Go, go, go. So your toe is all about in which way this tyre faces in or out. So it either faces, in towards the car more or out towards the track more. So admittedly, toe and camber in this game, and the other guys in here, the sprint, can attest to this as well. Tyre and camber is a little bit broken because it doesn't have the effect on the tyres that it should. So if we're talking real life, if you had a high amount of toe and camber or both, that should in theory increase the tyre wear, but it doesn't. So you'll find a lot of the time, not all of the time, some setups won't have full camber, but most of the time you'll find the camber will be at the maximum or close to. And what I'm talking about with camber and toe will be the same, most likely on the front. You might see it maxed on some setups, and that's just because you're getting more angle out of the tire, which can assist with rotation of the car on the front, getting it turned in, gripped up more. But then you might get some points where, if the car's understeering too much, you might find it could be due to the amount of toe that you have. So if the car's not, turning in how you'd want, you might reduce the toe or something like that. Generally, you'll find most people have their toe anywhere between probably about -0.1 and maximum. It's a pretty sort of open window policy with toe in the game. Obviously, I don't want to refer too much to real life here, but it doesn't have the effect that it should, like it used to in the game, where you'd have a higher amount of tyre wear and things like that. So that's where your toe comes in. It's based on the angle in or out of the car that the tyre actually faces. Camber is the angle, and you've probably heard people talk about camber in real life on their stance cars and things like that. They have a certain degree of, camber. It's about the slant of the tyre. So the more slanted the tyres are, the lower to the ground the car will be. And obviously the lower to the ground the car is, the more amount of downforce you could get on the car and, have the ground effect as well, which you don't get too much out of these, but it helps you a little bit in that way. Most of the time you'll find camber will be maxed. That's not always the case, but yeah, most of the time it'll be probably between, I would say, -0.3 and -0.4 being the maximum on the front, and on the rear sort of is the same, but it only goes up to -3.5 degrees there. Caster is one that's only going to be seen on the front, and you'll find that most people on their setups will have that sort of maxed out because it gives you free camber for no reason. Not that that's going to be too much of a concern in that way. But it does actually give you a little bit more, feeling in the car. So if I had this turned down to the minimum, I'm not going to get as much feeling out of the tyre in the car. Whereas if I get, that's not obviously the general use of caster, but that tends to be how it's used a lot in ACCs.
So force feedback slider.
In the car. Yeah, almost a force feedback slider. Yeah, in this way. But there are a couple of other positives that it does actually magically get you more camber and things like that. Which again, the Academy series you guys don't need to necessarily worry about, but it can be the difference with some instant series. On the rear, in terms of your toe and camber, most of the time the camber is going to be near max, and I'll talk about situations where you might not max this in a minute, because this will be relevant coming up in a couple of rounds for those in the Academy. You'll find most of the time toe, you'll have, people will have this anywhere between, in a race situation, between probably 0 and I dare say at maximum probably 0.1 degrees of toe. Toe on the rear does actually give you a bit more of an effect in some situations with tyre wear on the rear. You'll find some people do use negative toe, which allows for a bit more rotation from the rear of the car. Sometimes it can over rotate the car, which is where you can have problems. Doesn't necessarily by the car sliding in the rear oversteering. That can be in any part of the corner, not necessarily just on entry or mid corner or on the exit. Could be all facets of the corner. That could be, if you have too much negative toe, you I probably wouldn't recommend a lot of people use negative toe unless you're very confident in the car and want to get that extra bit of or need that extra bit of rotation from, say, the rear end if it's understeering or things like that. In that facet, and camber again, you'll find most of the time it will be maxed to ensure you get the most out of a banking, things like that. There you go, John Charitos. Thank you. He's popped in a little screenshot there, image for you that shows you what each of what happens if you've got problems in certain areas, what to do. That is pretty accurate, John. I used to use that a very long time ago, so I would say that is still accurate in some facets. It's definitely accurate to real life. To ACC physics, yeah, I wouldn't say that's 100% accurate, but it'll give you a pretty good indication of what to do on a setup, for sure.
Fair enough.
The only situations I would recommend you guys be adjusting toe and camber from, not necessarily from max, just in a general sense, is when it rains. Because you don't want the tire wear to be high, and the camber and toe can also affect how your tire heats up. So you see over here in the readings, you've got OMI, which is outside, middle. I think it's middle. I think that sort of stands. It might be something else. And then inside. So this is the different parts of the tire and how it heats up. So you can see at the moment, because I've been sat here doing nothing, it's 70 degrees. That's a bit of a lie, but it's just sort of the standard reading that it shows. What you'll find most of the time is you want to have these, and this is getting a little bit technical, but you don't want these to go above 100 degrees. Is sort of the where if you go above there, you're going to start overheating the tires and causing yourself many a problem. So the camber and toe does affect what part of the tire carcass actually heats up. But again, look, Academy Series drivers that are in here, you don't necessarily need to pay too much attention to this. You guys are obviously just learning in this instance. So that's just a little note for you. Toe and camber does affect the outside, middle, and inside of the carcass of the tire where the grip is at, but it's not something that you guys need to per se focus on at this point. You don't need to worry about pad wear or disc wear either, or wear in general necessarily. You'll also be interested in obviously the PSI hot, and what this does is when you return to garage, the PSI hot, it will basically show you what the pressures were at when you return to garage. I know that technically it should show you what they were when they were at its hottest, but that will show you the hottest pressures that they were at. So if you see that one tire was, it was actually at 27.6 PSI or something, is in PSI, as you see, then you know, okay, I need to put my starting pressure down a little bit, 2 clicks or maybe 4, 5, 6 clicks to get it down near towards the, 27.0, high 26 ranges. So yes, just keep that little factor in mind there. Have you got anything to add there, Josh?
No, that's pretty much the main thing. I'd say those settings. Camber is definitely only really going to get you touched in the wet. Like that's where you start playing around with that stuff, and all the stuff about toe. It's very much preference based. I mean, I know some people like running positive toe in the front. I can't imagine doing that personally, but but it is done. So like whatever I would suggest with these kind of settings here, I've always encouraged people just to play around with them and just see what they do. That's the best way to learn it. And once if you find you land on something that's just comfortable to drive for your driving style, stick with it, and then slowly adjust it from there. But always max camber if dry.
Yes, absolutely. It's always just seems to be the way. Obviously, just ACC things there, really. So hopefully that covers of that for you, Darwin, even though as I say that you're typing. So that's see what you've got for me. Yep, beautiful. Awesome. So we'll cross that one off. Next question from anybody.
Yeah, can I go?
Hey?
I'll be asking if I can go. What can I ask?
Yeah, you can ask a question. Yep, sorry. Yeah, go for it. I'll get to you in a sec, Mark. If you want to message me or something, I can respond to you. Just DM me. I can't quite hear what you're saying with your mic. That's all. Yeah, go on, Daniel. Sorry.
No worries. I was gonna ask, what are you looking for in a qualifying setup compared to a race setup?
Yep, that's a very, very good question. So a lot of the time in qualifying, you'll find that in an overall setup, you'll find that the camber's always going to be the same. The toe on the front's probably going to be a little bit more aggressive. It might be, say, might not necessarily be max. It could be like 0.35. For example, that's a pretty aggressive setting. But then you might want to tone it back a bit in the race because obviously it can affect tyre wear a little bit, not as drastic as real life per se. So you might back this off to say negative 0.3 degrees of toe in the race. Similar thing with the rear toe. You might find people run into the negatives a little bit, negative degrees on the rear toe, or they might run into the positives. Generally, what I do with my race setups is, if I can, with the car being stable, you can, I run sort of, and Tom, Lucas, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, if you do the same thing, but I try to set it as close to zero as I can, because then the tire's not necessarily getting eaten on, one part of it, or being, affected by being pointed out one way or the other in terms of the tire wear. So you might have a couple of clicks positive in the quali setup, and then you might reduce a little bit in the race. You can keep it where it is, but you find if you're running negative toe in quali, I'd definitely try and adjust it to at least 0 or as close as you can, whether you have to go like negative 0.01 degrees or something. But from a tire standpoint, you'll try and probably run less aggressive toe, unless it's like a sprint race, then maybe you wouldn't. But yeah, generally from a perspective on that, you'd run, slightly less aggressive on a toe perspective. The pressures will be slightly different as well, because the car is heavier, which means it's being pushed into the ground further, so there's more pressure on the tyres, so they might get a little bit, hotter or cooler, depending on a few things as well. So you most likely need to adjust the pressures as well from that standpoint. From an electronics point of view, generally you might run a click higher TC in the race compared to qualifying. Good example, at least from sort of my point of view, is and you've mostly probably seen me, if anyone's watched me drive the Ferrari, what I tend to do is I'll run 4 to 5 TC in a quali situation, and then I might up it to say 5 or 6, just so it keeps the rear end in control a bit, tries to reduce the tyre spinning as much, so reduces the tyre wear as well. But you can obviously hold it where it is as well. Don't really mind from that perspective. It's, again, traction control tends to be a personal preference thing. But yeah, if you feel that you make those couple of changes for the race and then pop fuel and the car's a little bit unstable in the rear, on, say, throttle, you can always up the TC by a click and just see if that helps you out from that point of view. With the ABS, ABS is an interesting one, because it's quite a big personal preference one, I find. Most of the time I'll run similar ABS in the qualifying than I do to the race, but then I might adjust, and I'll get to that in a minute anyway. I'll adjust the brake bias, but we'll come to that in a minute. So ABS, some people do like to up it. a click maybe from quali to race, which is totally fine, and they might leave the brake bias where it is. So it's a little bit of a preference thing there. In the wet, you probably definitely up the TC and ABS at least 1, if not 2 clicks. Probably more so the ABS you might up 2 clicks. The TC you might only up 1 or leave it, possibly if the car's stable enough. They're probably the only changes I make there. Most of the time from an ECU or engine map, as most people call it, from a point of view, it's going to stay the same. You're not going to benefit a lot from changing that map unless you're trying to fuel save. And in the wet, it's a sort of a similar situation where there are wet maps in some cars, not all of them. Again, Ferrari's a good example. It basically has engine map 1. There's no fuel saving map. There's not necessarily a good wet map or anything like that. Merck's in a similar situation there as well, but ones like the Aston, McLaren, Lucas, Tom, does the Porsche technically have a wet one? A wet, like it's map 5 or something? I
Map
can't
2?
exactly remember. Map 2, yep. So you got things like map 2 as well for fuel saving, whatever. So it is a bit car dependent, and I can actually give you guys a link somewhere in the Academy chat if you'd like to a little a little forum that shows you the different engine maps per car. If you'd be interested to have a look at that, I can link that in the Academy chat for you.
I reckon putting some resources up for rookies would be good.
Yep, we can certainly do that. Fuel and brake. So I don't know if we probably do need to cover this because I don't think a lot of people realise what sort of the effects and what the different brake sets actually do here. And we'll come to that in just a second. But firstly, your fuel, that's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to run less fuel in quali to get those faster times because the car's lighter, so you're going to go faster. And then obviously you'd pop that up depending on however much fuel you actually need during the race. Now, the brake pad sets. You've got 4 different options. You have 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now, most of the time in a sprint race situation, anywhere from, the longest you've got one which is a very aggressive brake pad set. Most of you will run that in a racing situation from anywhere up to about 2 hours. I think these sort of the brake pads go off. That is dependent on something else, which I'll get to in a minute. So you have brakes pads 1, which are aggressive and will last about up to 2 hours, I think, is probably the limit I'd go to.
They'll last 4, but
4, but it's dependent on a few things.
That's like you're going to get trouble. But
yeah,
60 minutes is the optimal.
Yeah. So optimal 60 can go up to 4, but I wouldn't go any further than, probably 60. No, definitely no further than 2. Brake pads 2, you'll find most of the time you'll use them in anything longer than probably 2 to 3 hours race. Especially, you definitely use these in endurance races. You'll find most of the time people just use brake set 2. These can last, these are pretty varying in where they can last. We've seen some people last 12 hours, some last 10 hours, some last 14 hours. It's really dependent on their setup and their brake ducts, which we'll come to under the aero and explain what they do. So again, you can use brake set 2. They are less aggressive in terms of the braking, so you can sometimes adjust the you have to adjust your braking points a little bit, a couple of meters, further back, things like that. But this is one I'd recommend for the Academy Series people that are here. I would say if you feel that the brake set 1 is not, might be a little bit too aggressive for you to start with, I'd absolutely more than be happy for you to use brake set 2. It'll give you a good grasp on your braking and learning how to do that before you look to, give brake set 1 a go. Brake set 3 isn't really... Oh, yeah, go on.
Oh, no, I was just also saying that you can also use those brake pads mainly 1 and 2 to adjust. Some vehicles, you would have them offset, so you'd have 1 in the front and 2 in the rear, because some vehicles tend to lock up, maybe like a GDR, Aston comes to mind for some of those ones, and Bentley as well. But I've seen people offset brake pads to adjust how the car slows up, so you don't always have to match front to rear and vice versa. So it's just worth noting that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is something you'll see some people do. Brake set 3, you won't. It's very rare that you'll see people use this. This is one of the least aggressive brake pads, which is why they're basically never used. These used to be very early in ACC. These were sort of seen in I guess, per se, as the wet, driving in the wet. But these days, you won't ever touch brake set 3, so I wouldn't bother paying too much attention to that. They last a while, but they do lose you a lot of time in your braking, so don't worry too much about brake set 3. Brake set 4. Brake set 4 is the most aggressive of the 4, but lasts 20 minutes, if that, 15 minutes. So, again, I try to avoid using brake set 4 because they might get into bad habits as well with your braking points because you can brake later with them. But really, that's not really what we want to be pushing you guys doing. And by you guys, I mean the Academy people, the Sprint Series people here as well. You know, I'm not referring to you. So, yeah, brake set 4, try to avoid them. More than happy for you to test them yourselves or whatever. But, yeah, try to avoid them where possible.
They're very good for when you want to work out what your brakes feel like when they do decide to fail. Like just go out the single player server, run them until they die, and then you see what a brake's fading feels like, and that's sort of how you know when you know that the brakes are starting to fade for the other pads.
Yeah. Come on, Lucas, say words. No, doesn't want to talk.
They're set 1 with basically enhanced wear, I believe.
Yeah.
Is what I've heard. So not much
Yeah.
different to set 1.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, similar to that. So this is this is where things get interesting from a race point of view. A lot of this stuff won't change in the race between race and quali. You can adjust the roll bars a little bit if you want that extra bit of turn in, or a little less turn in, I guess, if the car's over rotating in quali or rotating the race. The easiest way I can explain it is the stiffer the front roll bar, the more understeery the car gets. The stiffer the rear roll bar, the more the rear turns in. So if the car's rotating too much in the rear, you can reduce the roll bar. You can go all the way down to 0. Some cars finish at 1, some finish at 0. I don't really want to focus too much on bump stop ranges, bump stop rates, wheel rates, things like that, because really between quali and race from a sprint point of view, a lot of that's not going to change, and not enough for a lot of you Academy drivers to see a difference. So don't pay too much attention to the bump stop rates and range and things like that. I can give you a quick overview of them, but other than that, they're not going to be too much of a use to you. Differential preload diff, again, it's a similar thing. It's not going to change a lot between a qualifying and a sprint race session. But if you feel that you want to change it, you can. This is so essentially what this little number tells you is based on. It's where the tires start working in tandem together again, I guess is the best way I could put it. So they sort of function on their own whilst you're off throttle. And then once you put a certain amount of throttle on, they start coming in and working together again. Probably the best way I can explain it. So it can help you based on, if you have a lower preload on the differential, you're going to get more off-throttle rotation. But if you have it, say, at maximum, a lot of your preload, a lot of your rotation will be done on throttle. So a good example, Lucas, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the Porsche is probably one you'd have it quite high, because I know.
No.
No?
It's
Ooh.
personal preference for a lot of cars.
Yeah. But I think the Porsche, at least this is probably my opinion, but the Porsche I normally have it a bit higher because it does a bit of rotation, a bit of its rotation on throttle. But yes, preload diff is one of those personal preference things. Same with the roll bars as well. It's a personal preference thing. Brake power, always leave this at 100%. That's not going to really affect you in any way between quali and race. Brake bias, as I was saying before, this can be adjusted between quali and race because the car's going to obviously have more fuel in it, whether that be more fuel in the rear for basically every car except the Porsche where it has the fuel tank in the front. So you might need to adjust that just to keep the balance of the car under braking there. So you'll find a lot of the time your brake bias might be slightly further back in quality compared to the race. Good example in the Bentley here, I'd probably run the brake bias if I was in quality probably at somewhere in the 61s maybe, but then if I was in a sprint race, I might up it a bit to, somewhere in the 62s. So again, that's partially a personal preference thing for a lot of people. So with the in tandem with the ABS, it's really up to you how you adjust that. Steer ratio, again, it's another personal preference thing. That's just basically how much steering input you need to put in the car for it to turn a certain distance. A lot of the time, most people, it's a car dependent thing is the big thing. So you might find in the Bentley people have it at 10, and then like me in the Ferrari, I might have it max at 16 or 15. So again, another personal preference thing there. Everybody's least favorite page dampers. Don't academy drivers, please don't even bother trying to touch these and wasting your time trying to make these look perfect. It's not worth your time. You're not going to get enough time out of it worth you investing in that. So don't worry about that one. From an aero point of view, there are a few little things that might change here. If you're running full wing at a track in quali, that's going to stay for the race regardless. So you don't really need to worry too much about that. Bathurst here is a good example where some drivers and people who drove on the weekend can tell me otherwise. They would have run in their qualifying sessions, they would have run a lower wing, and then in the race, they probably would have run a click higher potentially. Not saying that's what they would have done. Lucas, Tom, oh no, Tom, did you race? I think you did, but Lucas, I don't know if you guys did that in the Mustang or not, running lower than higher in the race. Fix your
Gonna
microphone,
give
Lucas.
trade secrets over there, man.
Only because of rain, right?
Yeah, only because but in some instances you will still find, even if it is dry, that some people prefer that little bit of extra stability, and that might up it a click. But definitely in the wet, you would up this in the race, or even in quali as well. I guess you might up this a click.
How about for cars like the Ferrari, which is like always at the top or something? Would you reduce it?
With the wing, you're talking?
Yeah, mainly the wing. I think there's some cars that are all the way to the max.
Yeah, so if your car's to the max in quali, I tend to leave it in the race. Some people do reduce it because they want that little bit of extra top speed in the race. And look, I'm not against that. You just need to make sure that you adjust your ride heights accordingly. So at most tracks, in a ride height point of view, both in the quali and the race, you're going to be at the front, you're going to be probably slamming it all the way to minimum. In the race, however, you might up it a click or two potentially, because that's all based off the car losing fuel will obviously raise the rear throughout the session. So some people prefer to pop the front ride height a little bit to then combat the fuel usage in the rear, which will then bring the rear up. So if I was per se example, this is going to be a terrible example, but at Bathurst in the Bentley, if I'm running, 4 wing, I might run about 70 millimeters in the rear ride height. I don't want to run that too high, because what will happen there is the aero will basically have a spasm, because the car has low wing and the rear's so far up in the air that it can't get the downforce into the car, can't push it down enough, and then you'll spin out and things like that. So if this was, say, my quali setup, I might have this all the way down here. I have 70 mil in the rear, and I might have 4 wing, but then what I might do in the race is up it to 5 wing. And then what I might do is I might leave the rear ride height, or what I could do as well is to combat the fuel usage, because as I said, with fuel usage, the rear end in the Bentley, at least because it's in the rear will start to come up. I might pop it down, a click or two, which is all based on how much fuel you actually pop in, obviously. But I think it tends to be, from what I've seen, about every 25 to 30 litres of fuel that you add in, you pop it down a click. I could be wrong on that, and it could be car dependent again, but that's sort of my general rule, is sort of every 25 to 30 litres, I'll pop it down a click in the ride height to combat it for when the fuel usage over a stint in the race. The last thing here, from a quality of race point of view, are the brake ducts. So these are the ducts that you can actually see at a little bit on the airflow chart here in the setup. That's what flows into the brakes to cool them down, to cool the brake pads down. So a lot of the time you will probably run them at, and for reference, higher number means they're more open, lower number means they're closed, which means less air will get into them, which means they'll be hotter, but hotter might allow for more aggressive braking. So it's a bit of a balancing act at times in quali, and not necessarily quali, but certainly in the race. So just keep that in mind. I thought you were going to say something there, Josh.
No, I was just seeing all the other questions on the we have as well.
We've got a few to get through, so I'll shut my mouth in 2 seconds. So in quali, you might be running, you might run two on the front and 3 on the rear. Again, it's car and track dependent. You might actually run higher on the front than you will on the rear, things like that. You'll learn that over time. But then in the race, what you might do, if the temperatures change and you want, the brakes to last you a bit longer, you might pop the rear up a click and the front up a click. If not, maybe 2 clicks depending on temps and things like that. So, hopefully that answers your question, Daniel. Anyone else that probably had similar questions there? I'll shut my mouth now and you can answer some questions, Josh.
No, I was also going to say about the Ferrari question with wing.
Yep.
I know there is like certain vehicles have like a setup ideology there where it's almost set regardless of track. Like, this car will always want max wing or some of that. I like to go against that thought process. Not necessarily all the time. Like Hobbsy knows I'm a min max guy myself. So like I put minimal effort into things, but what I always do is have a play around, like and it does sometimes pay off. There was a Nord's 12-hour race here at OOR probably 3 months ago now, and our Ferrari was running pretty much minimum wing. It was 2 clicks on the rear wing, which is against the usual setup that you would generally see on a Ferrari, but it was a weapon. Just so it doesn't always have to be the same. If you're changing other things on the mechanical grip page and your ride heights are different, you don't always have to run like a set wing. So I know there is that kind of those ideas that go out, and they're good to stick with, in my opinion. But sometimes do test things out. It's not always just one way works. It's very driver dependent. And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to touch on there just to close this question up. Next question we have is from Ben Simpson. When changing cars and tracks, would you carry over settings like roll bar and tow as a style point, then adjust from there, or just drive and see what happens? Personally, if it's changing cars and tracks, I would just have a base set up, like whatever the car's base is, and go from there. I wouldn't carry over anything from a different car onto a new car, because one thing ACC does do fairly well is make each car feel a little bit unique compared to some other sims where they're very hard to tell the difference from. Like, you can definitely tell differences from a Bentley to a Mustang and so on and so forth. So I would just start fresh and experiment with what that individual car needs. Not all clicks are going to work the exact same way on a different car, especially when you start changing where the motor is orientated in. So hopefully that helps there, Ben. Let me know if you need more depth on that, but that's my thought process behind that. Next question from Matthew Bolt. Probably not an academy question. How are the pro guys pulling their brake bias right back to help with turn-in, perhaps at the expense of the rears? I guess this is one that Hobbsy can also touch on as well, but this to me is still personal preference. Brake bias, it can be adjusted for many things. Drawing upon recent experience from the Bathurst 12-hour, myself and Connor Hind were finding that we were happy running the brake bias a little bit more forward during that race, where conventional theory would suggest that we'd want to run it more rearward. So it's very driver style dependent, and not everyone's going to be pulling the brake bias back to get a turn in, and it depends on how you generate your turn in the vehicle. But if that's how you like to get turn in, then I would be shocked if you're managing to pull the brake bars back enough for it to really start harming the rears enough for it to be noticeable just from a normal wear perspective. I could maybe on some cars that lock a little bit, but ABS in this game's fairly forgiving. So I don't think there should be too much of that. You'd probably be generating most of your wear from your toe and camber settings and just how rough you are on the vehicle in general with steering inputs. Min-max damper is the way to go. Correct, Taufik. Min-max all the way. Also, is there anything that you want to say on that, Hobbsy? I don't want to.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about there, Bolt, with having seen some drivers, sprint drivers, pro drivers, having the brake bias all the way back. Now, a good example I've got for you on that is you'll find, and I'm guilty of this in some cars, is a good example for me would be the M4. So I run the M4 with its brake bias all the way back, and the reason for that is because the rears on all cars are obviously doing the driving wheels, is that allows to put more braking pressure on them to get the car slowed down. And then it allows, especially on the BMW, the fronts to actually get turned in, because in the BMW, a lot of the turning in the BMW weirdly is done under braking and trail braking. So, yeah, you'll find it is a personal preference thing though. Some pros prefer to have it all the way back because it might be better for their braking performance. And then you might, as Josh said there, that they run it a little bit further in the front in their car. But in certain cars like the M4 is a good example where you'll see it. Porsche is another one you'll see it. Outside of those two, I can't think. McLaren possibly. Tom, Lucas.
What are you thinking? Minimum brake bias car?
They'd have brake bias all at the back.
Your Ford, McLaren, Mercedes, Lambo sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You won't. I don't think you'd see it, at least from a pro drivers, because not many pros obviously drive the Merc anyway. You won't see many people in the Merc with it all the way back because it can cause other problems. But yeah, certainly Ford, Lambo at certain tracks. Yeah, Porsche, BMW will have it further back, and it's just again a personal preference thing. People might find they get the optimum braking performance out of the car with it all the way at the back. That's totally fine.
All right, is that the clarification all concluded? So. Okay, sweet. Well, if they have any further questions on that, we can chuck it in the chat or ask in VC. Remember, guys, you can ask in VC if you want. You don't have to follow through with a chat.
Don't be scared. You can talk to us.
Yeah. Yes, it is being recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree there with Eagle. It is more likely that one setup for the same car will translate a little bit better over to another track than the likelihood of one setup working on another car. It's highly unlikely. I don't know of many people that have copy pasted a setup from a Macca onto a Lambo. Some of those settings can't even be the same, so there's no real point. Just start it off, treat it like a new car.
Yeah, I think as Josh said, is there's, if you create a base setup, like I have a base setup that I don't really use anymore, but I did have one for the M4. I just basically popped it in at each of the tracks and then adjusted from there, because there will be some settings that stay the same at each track. So just do that, and that will make your life a little bit easier, save you a bit of time.
Yeah, definitely. Question from Sean Whelan. What changes would you make to take a dry set up to a wet setup? I think right at the start we kind of touched on it with the camber settings. Camber is going to be one of your main ones to play with there. And then from there, the only thing I would focus in Academy is your camber and your aero page. You can start playing a little bit with your mechanical grip tab, making things slightly softer. But do camber and aero first, and if the car feels alright, run that. Don't start completely overhauling the vehicle because there's different grades of how wet exactly a track can get. So there might be some grip still out there, but definitely maybe like raising the front a click or two can help in the wet as well, or lowering the rear to make it a little bit more stable. But yeah, maybe less camber, less rake. And rake, for those that don't know, is I guess the difference between the front ride height and the rear ride height. It's the angle of the vehicle. Because that's how GT3s produce a fair amount of downforce.
If your car feels excellent in the dry, it needs minimal changes to go to the wet usually. We use the completely dry setup for the 12 out.
You liar. No, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's good. It's bueno. Can run slicks in medium rain, thanks to. I don't know if I'd run slicks in medium rain. You change the wets. That's the one thing I forgot to mention with your setup is that you change from dry tires to wet tires. Make sure that you do that.
I mean, you could do it if you want.
Yeah, I mean, give it a go. Oh, Gobby, yeah, it should be fair if Gobby said it. Just do it at that point. Gobby knows best. But yeah.
Got a question with temperatures. So if it's say a really hot day, how much does that affect as well the changes apart from tire pressures?
It's mainly just going to be your tire pressures. I mean, it'll affect your overall top speed and stuff just in general. If it's a really hot day, not all cars, but most cars get affected by. I think one car I remember was at Barcelona. The GDR seemed to not care at all about hot weather in terms of straight line performance. So if it's a hot weather, maybe just change to the GDR from memory. But yeah, mainly tire pressure. You're going to be changing your brake ducts to try and keep those brakes cold so they're not affecting your tire temps, increasing those. And there will be some stuff in the suspension tab, but it just depends on how hot that track is. What are you thinking, Jose?
I was just thinking about brake ducts.
Yeah.
It's probably the big thing that you will change because as the brakes heat up, it also actually heats up the tire carcass. So you've probably seen if you've driven around in a hotter track that in the let me go back into the widget so I can show you what I'm talking about. But you will have possibly seen if you once I hit drive that down. I know you can't see my mouse, but down where it's got the pressures down there in the bottom right where the tires are green, what you might have seen them go yellow on part of the tire, and that's because the brakes are actually putting heat into the tire when you brake, obviously into the carcass. So if you've got a hotter track, like if it's high 30s track temperature, and obviously if ambient's probably going to be quite high as well in that case, you always want to have the brake ducts more open because if the brakes are cooler, it's not going to put as much temperature into the tire, therefore increasing, the pressures and what. That's probably the only other change I'd make other than obviously your tire pressures.
Do the brake ducts make much of a difference in the aero of the car?
Yes, it's a similar theory, IRL.
No, I think he was asking aero.
Aero, sorry, I thought I heard him say IRL.
No, yeah, no. I don't think so. It'd be marginal if any, at all.
There is one effect it has, and you probably won't see it. And this is me getting really technical. If you have them like say really close, like one on the one brake duct on the front really closed, and then one brake duct on the rear really closed, and then go into the race and have it 6.6 all the way open, it will take a hit on the top speed. Not by much, but if you want to know the aero effect, it can affect top speed, like 1 or 2 Ks, but there is a possibility of that.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Question from Matthew Bolt. Might have missed this, but typically my understanding is you want lower pressure as possible for max grip. So the ideal window would be lower end of 26 to 27.2. typical setups I've found are always at the up end. Is there logic to this in this game? Max grip in this game is mainly simulated at like 26.8 to 27.2. Is what the current patch has done to tire pressures. From what I've seen in all setups, everyone's trying to target just that 0.4 difference in tires. Lower, if you want to go lower, the only time I can think about playing with lower pressures, and even then it's marginal, is some of the slower cars like a M2 or something. You could go lower there, possibly get some more rotation in the vehicle, but I mean it would be so negligible. So I would just target high 26s, and if you dip into the 27.2s, it's not the end of the world. There's still a decent amount of grip around that area. 20. What does each section on the tire widget actually represent? I understand it's temp pressure, but what is it? It's in, mid, and outer. Is those little 3 green lines? So is that what you're talking about on the tire widget? But that's just, yes. So that, okay, yeah. So it is just the inner, mid, and then the outer side of the tires for each of those corners there, and then yeah, you can kind of get the gist of where you're generating a lot of heat. Most of it's going to be the inner first because of the, like we said earlier, we'll be running max camber in the dry, so you'll be getting a whole bunch of friction there always, and it's close to the brakes, I guess. Well, maybe not actually. Maybe that's mid.
You'll find the middle we usually will not go yellow unless the rest of the top the heat comes from the inside or outer of the carcass. So the inside might come from the brake. The outside will definitely come from the how much you lean on a tire through a corner. So if you go through a corner, you'll see it go probably a darker green and then possibly yellow as you're going through like a very cambered or corner that really puts a lot of pressure on one side of the car. You'll see the little changes there. But otherwise, yeah, the 3 sections are your inside, middle, and outer section of the carcass of the tyre.
Is there any other questions?
Sorry, you go ahead, Daniel. I just wanted to ask, managing tire pressures. So is it right that you increase pressures to prevent them heating up too much, and do the opposite if you want them to heat up more?
Yes.
Yep, correct.
Yep, that's right.
I would I'd also argue that in this game, 9 times out of 10, if you just get your pressures right, the temps almost manage themselves to a certain extent. It's gonna be, there's not many times, especially not in academy, where we're gonna be running conditions that would require such intense tire management at that kind of level. And there's been a handful of times in recent sprint series where I can think of where I've had to kind of use those theories exclusively to try and manage my tire temps. I guess I might be on the lazier side of drivers in terms of what I care about in the vehicle, but I don't know. That is the correct theory though. So yeah. Daniel, you had a question?
Yes. Of the continuing on tire pressures, I know a couple of you guys have said over the last 2 races to not hit the curbs on the third lap, because that will take away maybe 0.1 or 0.2 of your max pressure. Is that a blanket rule for all curbs, or just the really hard, aggressive?
It's mainly for the aggressive curves. It's where you can actually feel a fair amount of contact, and it's also important to, I guess, take into account when you're hitting those aggressive curves. So let's say Alton Park, which was not that long ago, a good one to draw upon is some of those chicanes there. The first 2 to 3 laps until your tires have got the pressure into them. It's really important just to miss those curbs at the start. So yeah, you'll sacrifice a little bit of pace on your opening stint in the race, but not doing that would overall you'll lose less pressure than if you hit those curbs immediately while they're trying to raise. It almost just dampens the effect of them raising overall, and you end up losing a bit more pressure than if you just give it a little bit of a break and wait for it to raise. So that's the main thing there. But yes, it does. You do get pressure loss, and it's not a blanket rule to like every curb's gonna net me a certain amount of loss, but it is mainly your aggressive curbs, I would say, and some tracks also just are bumpy enough to get a really small amount of pressure loss just anyways, just by you being on the track. So
That is so much.
no worries. Been practicing against bots in a quick race. How do we simulate the temp set by you guys in the race?
I can show you that.
Go ahead, take it away.
Awesome.
It's all based off the. So if we were to, per se, quick race, really it doesn't matter what mode you put it in. It's all about the conditions that you set here. So what I've got set up here, this is a general hot lapping server setup. So you don't have any dynamic weather, which would then obviously turn the variability off. The cloud cover is generally around sort of 20%. The average ambient is, 18, 19 normally. And obviously you'd have grip level optimum wetness at 0 and standing water at 0. So you can use, if you look in the, the next round chat, which obviously hasn't been updated for Zolder yet. But I can tell you it's actually going to be dry, not wet for Zolder now. So I can confirm that for you, and we'll update you on that anyway. But the weather settings are actually down below, and you can pop those into here, and you can get a pretty good understanding of what the rough conditions will be, and you can use that in your race. Obviously, at Monza we had 16 degrees ambient, so that would be down at 16. The cloud level would be 0.1, which is 10%, which is about here. There's no rain variability, which would be under precipitation, which you'd have to turn on, which comes on when there's certain cloud cover. So you wouldn't worry about the rain variable too much there anyway, because that can only be turned on when you're at a certain percent of cloud cover. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but it should give you at least a rough idea of what the race is going to, in racing against bots in those conditions.
Yeah. Also another thing, just I'll get to Michael Clark's question soon as well. But Mark, I would encourage, and I'm not removing merit from practicing with bots, but when you're with bots, they race on a very set path, and it doesn't help too much with what might happen on actual race day. And another place just that I can think of that might be able to give you some, I guess, racing against other people, and you don't have to worry about the settings as much because they mainly mimic them quite well, is in Fruit Bowl. So if you just search that up online, and there's many other OOR members, including from Academy, that hop in there and race. And it might really be, it's a lot more fun than racing against a bot. I understand if you can't always make it online, or your work hours are slightly different, so that's completely understandable. But it is a good place to practice sometimes, and because they're quite some of the drivers are there are quite close with Fruit Bowl. The Fruit Bowl does tend to mimic the sprint calendar of recent with settings and all of that. So something that you wouldn't have to worry about if you're trying to set up for a race or just practice against other drivers. Might be a good go there. Yes, it is a public lobby, but it is filled with league races. some public people, but it is heavily admin. So if there's any griefers, they tend to get rid of them pretty quickly. So it's a good place to go if need be. Michael Clark, just to reach on that, it's really hard to know how much to muck around with setup when you're still bad anyway. Now, on that, yes, maybe. Setup only equates for like the last maybe, if I was to draw upon, no, I would want to say the last 20% of your pace, maybe less than that. I think most drivers or pro drivers will be able to get about 85% of their pace just off the aggressive preset on most cars. So if you're finding that don't be too concerned with the setup. Always feel free to ask in the chat if someone has a base setup, and you might feel like it's worse than the aggressive one, then use the aggressive preset. But just practicing good habits, correct braking markers, good driving lines, that's where you're going to generate most of your pace. And less time in the setup screen and more time on the track will ultimately will be better for you in your pace, and better for any driver. You don't get faster by just clicking buttons in the pit lane. So yeah, don't be too distracted by it. Just get out there on track, even if you're just on the aggressive preset, and see what you got. And then if you're confused in which direction to head, feel free to ask in the Academy chat room or the setups channel. And we have many drivers here who are very active and are always helping out. So yeah, but yeah, don't be too distracted by the setup page. I know a lot of sim racing draws seems to attract a lot of people who are very data dependent. They love to see data and know everything, and it is a great place to be, because there's things like MoTech and the setup page, and you can live in there for decades if you want. But I would suggest that you'd probably best be spending time out on the track.
If only it was as easy as sitting in the pits and pressing buttons.
Yes, or just sitting in the pits and cracking open a cold one and watching other drivers go past. You might be able to get some pace like that. A lot of setups online will be harder to drive as well. Yep. Yeah, there's always variance, and remember, when you are taking a setup from someone else, it is most likely made to their preferences or the preferences of the company, such as Go, Hymo, whoever who made it from that driver. They don't make it for the masses. They just make it for the guy to go out and set a really nice hot lap on, and so that it's nice and sellable. So it'll be made for them, and it might need adjusting for yourself as well. But it's not to say they're not good. For quite a while, and I still do. I do love me a little Hymo setup where I don't have to worry about anything. So yeah, it was a good one. Just get Lucas to do all the work for the setups. He loves just grueling over setups for hours at a time. That's what his full-time job.
I will carefully craft a setup by using the rename tool in Windows to change a paid setup.
That's good enough. It's enough work. Yep, that's totally fair, Mark. It is setup page can be hectic. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that even pro drivers don't play with. I mean, there's very little amount of pro drivers that actually even care about the dampers page currently. So there's marginal. So in my eyes, there's 3 pages. It's the tires, mechanical grip, and aero, and the rest I don't even know it's there. So
yeah, that's where I spend my time.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I imagine we're reaching just over the hour mark now, so we'll be looking to get this to a close, unless there are some big questions or important ones that you feel need to be answered.
Why are we going away from the wet race?
Why are we going right? That is due to the Bathurst 12-hour, the 12 hours of wet, and it's at risk of making 4 races in a row wet. But it doesn't mean that a wet race won't be happening in the Academy calendar. That is something that Mitch and myself are looking at changing. It's not going to necessarily match sprints. It might not match the sprints calendar when they get a wet race, but we are looking at definitely making a wet race appear for the Academy calendar. So don't worry, there definitely will be one. Just stick around.
I was hitting 1 minute 40s going around Boulder in the wet.
Oh, now you can just instantly find over 10 seconds of time in your lap time. Those are very satisfying. Go lap in the dry.
Oh, yes.
Wet Barcelona is the best option. Yeah, it's a great option for the rain. Any other questions?
Someone's frantically typing right now. I can feel it.
Yeah. While they type, I will say on that fruit bowl topic that just before I did this, we did this Q&A, I was chatting with Hobbsy, and I was in a fruit bowl, and I think I was actually racing against John Rad here, who was him and I were in a wet Zolder, and then Hobbsy told me, because I was busy trying to make a wet Zolder setup because I had nothing to go off, and Hobbsy told me that it's changed to dry. So John and myself had fun in the rain for no reason.
Yep.
Awesome.
Are we going to have any discussions about these cluster crash bombs we're having at the moment?
Sorry, what was that? Just turn you up. Hold on.
Crash bombs. So in other words, turn one crashes and wiping everybody out.
I think
No.
it's like
No.
it's
That's all right. Doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
No, it's one of those things, Mark, that it's that as you've already heard me in the last couple of runs, that's a discussion and a piece for A, the walkthroughs, and B, I know that that's more a general topic, and that's what we talk about, but I would prefer more Academy Series drivers to be around, and we want to be using those practice races as the example, and then highlighting that on race night. So we will continue to be highlighting those, but yeah, probably not something we'll talk about here.
Yeah.
Once we've got more Academy drivers around, absolutely we'll highlight it for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that there is going to be a lot of crashing at T1 in Academy. There's going to be a lot of drivers where that's their first time in a lobby with other drivers that's not bots or not public lobby drivers approaching that T1, and it is actually fairly stacked grid as far as Academy series go in an APAC region. We were seeing high 30s, which is it's stacked. So it's going to be full on, and I think you guys should all give each other some grace out there. There's going to be mistakes. Just realize it's a learning place. The Academy, there's no points in the line, and it's mainly just to try and learn and do your best to not put all the onus on the person that crashed into you. Yes, it's easy to blame the one person that missed their braking marker and absolutely sent you to 90, but there is things that drivers do in the sprint series to avoid being hit, whether that's something they've noticed in their rearview mirror and they quickly don't turn in for a chicane and they just watch that driver fly by them and then turn in. There's defensive driving tactics that can help you survive races. So always, if you have been involved in a post race in a big race incident or big crash, I can't suggest enough to go and have a post race time to sit down and analyze what happened in that situation that got you there. And yes, you can analyze that driver's on board as well, which is always important to see where they went wrong. But also analyze yourself. Start thinking about those ways of what if I could have done this? Was there a chance I could have avoided this? Because ultimately, that's the best thing. Once you start giving yourself tools to start avoiding incidents and surviving a race, and working on those consistently, you will start doing very well in GT3 racing, because GT3 racing is full of carnage all the time. That's just what it is. It's the reason why I love GT3 racing. It's very fun. It's a lot more organic than say F1, where there's DRS and ERS and stuff being deployed to make those moves. It's a lot more of door rubbing. So don't be too harsh on yourself if you have been involved in a big crash. Everyone here is learning. And Mitch and myself and all the other the rest of the community is we're all in this to try and help everyone limit those crashes and learn best practice in racecraft, so that when you guys are ready to move off to the sprint series, that you can do so comfortably. But yeah, don't hold yourself and don't get despondent and decide sim racing is not for you, because you came here for a reason at the start to have fun, and that can still happen in sprint series. So yeah, that's my main thing. Don't get burnt out by the big turn 1 incidents. They happen everywhere, and you can see that even on the sprint series streams at night. Any other questions? Going once, going twice, and gone. Yeah, I think Hobbsy and I will close that up for tonight. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate all your guys' time. We look forward to running the Zolder walkthrough next week Sunday. It will be in the dry. But yeah, really appreciate everyone's time coming in. I know it was a 12-hour just yesterday, so it's a lot of you might have angry partners now after sitting here for an hour. But be brave, best of luck, and we will see you next week Sunday. Thanks, guys.